get started. We ready? Welcome back, folks. We're picking up our afternoon agenda, which is working on the deputy sheriffs, the state paid deputy sheriffs. And part of our charge is to submit a report in terms of any recommendations we might have. And Michelle Childs has reached out to Ameren. I can't pronounce your last name,
Aberdaly,
who staffs the government operations committees. And so Ameren sent out yesterday her draft of what's my iPad? Is that my iPad?
Might be.
Yeah, I hope so.
Not mine.
That'll be mine. Yeah. Sent out the draft of her memo, or that would be our memo. And I'm assuming it's been posted on our webpage.
It is there.
Okay, because I've only seen it on my email here. So Amber, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you can quickly just walk us through. And your memo would be great.
for the record, Ameren Aberdaly Legislative Council. You have before you a memo of approximately 6 pages. This memo has a background section followed by an overview of the committee's review of deputy sheriffs, specifically transport deputies. And then the last section has recommendations and a conclusion. So starting with the background, this lays out that the memo addresses full-time deputy sheriffs whose primary responsibility is the transportation of prisoners and persons with a mental condition or psychiatric disability. Pursuant to state law, these full-time deputy sheriffs, referred to as transport deputies in this memo, are paid by the state. The Executive Committee of the Vermont Sheriff's Association and the Executive Director of the Department of States Attorneys and Sheriffs jointly have authority for the assignment of position locations in the counties of transport deputies and review the county location assignments periodically for the efficient use of resources.
I don't think you have to read everything.
I just wanted to set the
Oh,
stage
okay, okay.
for this thing.
Thank you. That's
I
right.
won't read line by line. I
Yeah,
promise.
we've got notes out there, so I keep forgetting about that. Thank you.
So you'll see that this has an overview that there are 3 departments within the agency human services that require transports for individuals in their custody. So transport deputies within this memo provide some of those services. On page 2, you'll see that Act 74 of 2021, Section E207, has the charge for this committee, which is examining the current system for transporting prisoners and persons with a mental condition or psychiatric disability who are in the custody of the state, including transports provided by deputy sheriffs who are paid by the state and transports provided pursuant to contracts that certain state agencies have entered into with the county sheriff's departments, and then requires that this committee report its findings and any recommendations. Moving on to committee review of transport deputies. You'll see we've noted the date this committee took up this topic. There are links to the meeting history, as well as agendas and witness written testimony. The following sections from 2 to page 3 concern topics that the committee heard testimony, including first, billing practices for transport duties, primarily from the Office of the State Auditor. The Department of States Attorneys and Sheriffs also supported the auditor's recommendation that consistent timesheet procedures and practices be used across sheriff departments and at the state level that detail at a minimum the time of hours worked, number of hours worked, detailed description of the job and duties performed, and the signature of the employee and supervisor. The next topic was transport deputy duties and organizational structure. The committee heard from several witnesses on this topic, including the Lamoille County Sheriff, the Department of States Attorneys and Sheriffs, and some of those comments and recommendations from those witnesses are included in here from page 3 on to page 4. You'll see that any written witness testimony have links at the bottom in the footnotes for anyone who wishes to go into more detail about those recommendations and that testimony. I would say to summarize this section, it would be these witnesses were seeking clarification about transport deputy duties, given the joint structure of being supervised in part by the state as well as by the sheriff's offices. Next, there is a topic on training for sheriffs and deputy sheriffs. There was some written testimony provided to you, actually in response to questions from the committee at an earlier hearing this summer. And then lastly, costs of contract transportation services. The Joint Fiscal Office provided testimony regarding Department of Mental Health and Department of Children's and Families hourly rates and annual spending of transport deputies. This would be contract services specifically. And notes that DMH spends approximately $200,000 to $215,000 per year on transports. And the Department of Children and Families has budgeted approximately $61,000 for fiscal year 2022. Next, moving on to page 5, this is the recommendations section. The committee recommends these committees, which would be the House and Senate committees on appropriations, on government operations, and on judiciary, on the following issues that have come up during the committee's review. The first is clarification in statute of transport deputies' duties when not actively transporting individuals. The second is consider whether a change in the organizational structure of transport deputies would benefit the state and individuals transported transport deputies. Third, moving on to page 6, examine the reimbursement rate for non-state paid deputies, also referred to as per diem deputies within this memo, who are providing transportation services. 4, examine ways to improve the transport services for court appearances. 5, a consideration of training and recruitment of transport deputies when considering the organizational structure of transport deputies moving forward. Last is the conclusion. The committee finds that there are significant concerns with the state's ability to efficiently and effectively use transport deputies to meet the state's needs. The committee recommends the above issues be further examined from both a fiscal and policy viewpoint by committees of jurisdiction, and that the role and duties of transport deputies be clarified.
It's a pretty thorough memo. I mean, it does lay out the work that we did. And then our recommendations, you know, like it encompasses a lot of our discussions. So, Teresa?
I agree, Madam Chair. I guess one of the things that I am wondering about is the specific recommendation that many appeared to agree with from the state auditor's perspective, that there be more consistent timesheet reporting. That's not really contained in any of the recommendations that we're making, or is it referenced? And that seems to be something that could be addressed. The other thing, may not make any difference to anybody else, but it seems as though we had some discussion about this at the last meeting that, and I appreciated Senator Sears' history about how this came about. It seems like mentioned that there's potential that this is sort of mentioned in number 2, in recommendation number 2, and I might elevate recommendation number 2 to be recommendation number 1, and then have the other things follow it. But that this may be a structure that the current structure may be an outdated structure, and to reevaluate that based upon what the current needs of the state are. That would be the context in which I would place that. I guess that would be feedback that I would have.
I second that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's, the needs for transported juveniles, for example, has changed dramatically, and the need, and that has shown itself to be problematic for the Department of Children and Families, where you've had social workers in motel rooms, that kids sitting at police stations because transport deputies deputies are not available. And also takes into account the use of video arraignment, which has sharply reduced the need for court transports. So,
I think we're not suggesting a specific solution to that, but
Right.
I think that we're saying like we really should evaluate what our needs are and, take a look at something that the structure has not really changed for any number of years, and maybe the structure really needs to be evaluated given our current needs.
So you're suggesting that we flip 1 and 2,
Mhm.
and that the title of 2 be more reflective that the current organizational structure may be outdated for current needs, and to really look at a new structure. Structural changes.
And also bringing your first point, I thought was a good one, that the recommendations don't pick up on that idea of a common hour sheet.
The timesheet, yeah, there isn't anything here about that, and I think that there was I'm not gonna say it was universal, but there was a lot of agreement from witnesses about that.
Other thoughts?
Reminding me of the uniform chart of accounts
Uniform what?
in the education
Oh,
field.
yeah, education law.
Timesheet should be easier than uniform chart of accounts, I hope, I hope.
Other feedback? Won't be that easy. You did a terrific job. I mean, you laid out, the testimony that we've received. And I think our recommendations have been captured in a broad enough sense, but with some specificity. And I would hope it would give some direction to the standing committees looking at this. That would help. Does it help, Dick, you think?
I don't know. It's a system that doesn't want to change.
Right.
And any change will be fought.
Mhm.
And the sheriffs, I'm sure by many of the individual sheriffs, but it's a system, in my view, that's outmoded. And it doesn't necessarily meet the needs of the state anymore. And they're also having a difficult time getting state paid deputies. And as I understand it, the state paid deputies are the lowest paid deputy sheriffs too. So there's a push to simplify it all and make them state employees, which I don't really have an opposition to, but I'm not sure what you accomplish by having them become state employees in the current system, other than upgrading their positions. Because in my view, we're not meeting the state's needs, and as hard as it may be to hear, but when you had a crisis in the hotels, housing the homeless in hotels, and the hotels wanted security, AHS, instead of getting coverage in Chittenden County from the Chittenden County Sheriff, who sent all 6, I believe the testimony was all 6 went home, or 8,000 some odd hours. They state contracted with the Lamoille Sheriff, who provided the coverage. That's not meeting the state's needs. And I know in Bennington County, 2 were home most of the time. And yet the Manchester Police Department, a small police department, was struggling to provide coverage with a number of people who, the hotels and motels that wanted some kind of security coverage and calls that were being made. So it's not meeting the people's needs any longer. And I suspect it's a relic. I guess I'm rather passionate about it. I think it's a relic of the 1970s, 80s, and 90s when we routinely had people going all around the state for court transports.
We didn't have as much need. The need has increased as well, so it's made it
Well,
more
the needs of
complicated.
DCF, the needs of the mental health system,
Everything,
those are all changed, and we're not changing the system.
Right.
exactly.
So we have a couple people who have zoomed in, Annie Noonan from the Sheriff's and State's Attorney's Department, as well as Sheriff Mark Anderson from Windham County. I don't know if either one of you would like to weigh in on this before we take some action. Annie?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Annie Noonan from Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs. Thank you. I also agree that the report is very well constructed and picked up many of the things that we raised as a department. I do want to just a couple of quick things. Certainly the common timesheet, I mentioned this before, I think it's really critically important so that we're able to assess across all the departments that have state deputies what they're doing, how they're doing it. It's very, very difficult right now and labor intensive for us to pull that data together. And I've done it a few times with our admin staff here, and it really would be wonderful if we had common definitions and common tasks assignments. So I think that would be really, really critical. Right now, just I want to comment about the upgrade of the positions. So I filed for a reclassification review for these positions back in June during the period of time when any agency or department is requesting a review of an entire title. So that is pending. We are working on providing the Department of Human Resources with a few additional points of information that they have asked Mark Anderson and I and Sheriff Marcoux. We're working on pulling together some of that information. That may happen anytime soon. That should help a little bit with some of the recruitment issues. But I do want to say that we don't have a lot of turnover in these positions. That we've been very lucky to have a very stable workforce in these. And I think part of that it has been because they're in Group C, the state law enforcement retirement. So that has helped a lot. They also, for the most part, are working a Monday through Friday schedule, which most law enforcement agencies can't offer that. And, you know, occasionally they're not, but for the most part, you know, there may be an extradition, but they're few and far between in terms of weekend work. And even extended hours, you know, Senator Sears is correct with video arraignment. There's much less of picking people up in Newport at 2 a.m. to get them down to Springfield. So I really think that video arraignment has helped a lot with some of those extended days. I think that's important to know that we really aren't turning these positions over very often. The other thing is when they do turn over, many of the sheriff's own staff, the other staff who are not state employees, raise their hand and say, I'd like to be considered. That is our biggest. Now that doesn't necessarily help, you know, the sheriff's total number of employees, but it does help us because many of them come over and transfer to us. In fact, right now there's a vacancy in Orleans, and Sheriff Harlow has an interested employee internally to her own private side of the house, and he would like to come over to a state position. And I think that all of those things make this job a little bit different and more attractive because it's law enforcement with a much more normal schedule, and it is in Group C. The other question that got raised was, you know, making them state employees and what would that accomplish? You know, I don't necessarily think that it may help out with the whole question of authority and this sort of bifurcated, you know, oversight of these positions. So I don't necessarily think the department would have a problem with that, but I don't want to speak on behalf of the sheriffs on that issue. And maybe that's something Mark Anderson could comment on or think about and comment at a later point. But I don't think it would be a problem. The one thing I would say, and many of you here remember the confusion that occurred when the Vermont Supreme Court did the in-ray election decision and basically looked at our county, our offices out in the field, the state's attorney's offices, and said, hey, they're county employees. That raised a real lot of problems for us when they were looking to organize and form a union, insofar as the fact that you could have had 107 employees with 15 contracts, collective bargaining agreements. And so members who are sitting right here today heard that as a concern. And what we did is we said that if that was going to occur, we would put them under one bargaining unit, that we would basically have them negotiating with the state, not individually with each sheriff, so that we couldn't wind up with these multiple contracts covering 25 employees. I would use that as a model or suggest that that be used as a model if in fact, they're moved to state positions, and that would be the negotiating group for that would be the Department of Human Resources and John Berard. That would be the default unless you wanted it to be the department, but I wouldn't have any problem with it going to the Department of Human Resources and under John Berard and Beth Vestigi. But that's sort of down the road, but that is a question that when Senator Sears said, what we'd have to look at what that would accomplish, we would also have to look at potentially what would be some of the unintended questions that might raise down the road. But thank you for listening to us on this issue and helping us potentially make the positions as helpful in state government as they could possibly be. I think that is certainly our goal here at the department, and I think many of the sheriffs, and I want to point out Sheriff Anderson, who has embraced that whole concept of how can we help other agencies and departments in state government, and has really been a model. And you heard Judge Grierson talk about the work that he's done with Sheriff Anderson and other sheriffs who have been really stepped up to the plate to help. So thank you very much for letting me comment this afternoon.
Thank you, Annie. Any questions before? Sheriff Anderson, would you like to weigh in on the memo?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, committee. For the record, Mark Anderson, Windham County Sheriff and President of the Vermont Sheriff's Association. I do apologize. I have what looks like the same weather as you, and my connection's been wavering. So if you start to lose me, I will gladly call in. With regards to the memo, I agree it represents testimony that this committee has received. There are a couple points that I would like to ask be included in addition to this. One is with regards to, I believe it's what will now be number 1, but the system and the description of what state deputies can do. So I guess number 1 and number 2 is to discuss the impacts that the electronic or video arraignments have had and the movement of people from that system. And that's through the program that the Judiciary, Department of Corrections, numerous sheriffs, and the Defender General's office came together to develop, which I've called the post-hearing transport program. It helps to reduce impacts to Vermont communities that house correctional facilities, as well as to improve public safety. The second part is to also consider the 2018 legislative study regarding the cost of the transport programs and include reference to that in regards to number 3. I think it's important that we do recognize efforts that the sheriffs have undertaken to minimize costs to the state of Vermont. Part of the current vacancies were intentional decisions by sheriffs not to hire into the state deputy positions as the judiciary continues to determine in its counties how it can open and provide trial services where transports are anticipated. So rather than just hire because we were authorized, there was a conscious decision not to hire and have those vacancy savings returned back to the general fund. And then just one final clarification. I do not believe that the state deputies are the lowest paid deputies or sheriff's deputies, but rather they are the lowest paid state law enforcement. They do not compare with other state level law enforcement for the purposes of pay grade assessment, which is the process that Annie was talking about. They're generally, and to the point of the strength of the position, they're generally well retained and well employed because they lead the costs or the pay of sheriff's deputies. We truly work as well as we can to provide services to the state of Vermont for cost-effective rates. And while I believe Senator Sears said in a prior hearing that we should work towards standardized rates for all the services, which is not the current practice, I think that we should examine how we can standardize the way in which the sheriff works with the state of Vermont, as well as how we implement the state deputy program.
Questions? Thoughts? Derek?
I think one of the issues that has been raised here, Sheriff and Annie, if you want to respond, it's what are the state paid deputies doing when they're not transporting people? And when they're not doing that, and you have other situations where the state is either contracting with sheriffs or others to provide, for example, transport of DCF people that you're doing yourself, Sheriff, or you have, Sheriff Marcoux had a contract to oversee the homeless population at hotels in Chittenden County. That was a separate contract with the state. And I guess what is it that these sheriff state deputies are doing when they're not transporting? And who controls that?
Sure. So Annie mentioned the bifurcated system of supervision. And so to a degree, both the sheriff as well as the department. Annie can speak to the conversation she's had with the sheriffs specific to actions that we were requesting that we can or cannot do, because we are conscious of the concern or the appearance that a state deputy is being used for contracted work as well as being funded by the state. So we are very careful to prevent that. Things that state deputies do is to provide law enforcement patrols within their communities. They support the Department of Mental Health or Department of Children and Families. They have worked to serve criminal and civil processes within the county. They have assisted with departments that are undermanned or understaffed, I should say, in terms of supporting resource shortages. So we have also worked to provide security and safety at the courthouses as able. There are certainly differentiations from county to county, based on the needs of those counties. So I hope that that's a broad enough answer to answer your question, Senator, but I'm happy to answer specifics as well.
Well, it answers the question, but it doesn't seem to me to be. So if you're getting paid by the town of, I gotta pick someplace in Windham County, not Bennington County. If you're getting paid by the town of Bellows Falls, and they have their own police department, you're augmenting that with a state paid deputy. Isn't that getting double pay?
So we have, Senator Steers, when the sheriffs were calling and saying, what can they do? We were saying clearly, no on the private contract. So if they're going to sit on the interstate with Pike, we said absolutely not. But in terms of letting them do assistance to other state agencies and municipalities, we were saying yes, provided they did not bill them for the same hours, the state transport deputy's time. So, for example, if they were at a courthouse providing courthouse security, the check-in through the, coming in the building and all of that, because they didn't have transports, we said that's okay, you can do that, but you can't bill. You can't bill that state employee's time to the judiciary. It's really, we've tried to make it so that they were supplementing their, that work, even in terms of like the law enforcement patrols. Most of the time they were, I think, going out as additional cars on the road to patrol the local communities. And again, we were saying, you cannot charge the town for that second person that you got running around.
Looking at Sheriff Marcoux's memo, I believe he says that that's one of the ways they pay for the deputies' vehicles.
Well, they might. Go ahead, Mark.
Senator, if I may. So in Sheriff Marcoux's case, he was using state deputies to provide support. I believe he was using a state deputy to provide support to the motel security program.
Mark, he doesn't,
The-
Mark, he doesn't have a state deputy, Roger.
Have I frozen? Am I back with you?
You're in and out, Mark.
Uh,
Maybe if you turned off your video might help.
There it is, he's back.
There,
Can you hear me now?
yes.
Great. So with regards to Sheriff Marcoux's program, I believe he used a state paid deputy to provide personnel and labor to the motel security program during the pandemic. The way that he worked out, and maybe Annie can speak to this since he's not here, the way he worked out the, I guess what we'll call a reasonable solution is that he did not bill for the personnel time for 4 of the 5 days. And then the 5th day was the day that he charged, which would provide the costs that aren't normally covered for them, such as the equipment, the vehicle, the training, et cetera. So that was something that he did. That's in terms of my deputies, they were providing patrols. And so to Senator Sears, your question, I had a contract with the town of Newfane. I currently contract with the town of Newfane, and we provide, I believe it's approximately 20 hours a month. So the work that my state deputies do in the town of Newfane, we would not bill to the town. That would be in addition. So as part of our accounting systems, we keep track of what is billed and not billed to towns, and we report out on that as well. That system has been deployed to several sheriff's offices as well. So we are, again, conscious of the double dipping and work to prevent that. But there's also to the point of discerning where we can and cannot use the state deputies as referenced in the draft memo of number 1. We are also asking for clarification because we have these times such as the hotels where we need personnel and we are looking for all hands. And we have this moral and ethical question of, well, what can we and can we not use the state paid deputies for? Whereas we don't have that same question when it's the staff of the sheriff's department that are not state employees. So clarification with that regard is beneficial to us, and we look forward to that discussion with the committees of jurisdiction.
So just as a point of clarification.
I want to read from what I was saying so that you don't think I made this up. On page 2 of the memo, it says, these cars do not bring in any supporting revenue when they're sitting idle during court hearings. Often cars are at the courthouse parking lot for several hours every transport. Sheriffs have traditionally utilized state paid deputies for some contracted work as a way to help pay for the cars and equipment. For that reason, the term double dipping does not truly reflect the situation. Earning extra money to help support the purchase of the equipment is necessary. However, I believe that working contracted details should not supersede the primary transportation responsibility. My belief is that state paid deputies, when not transporting prisoners for court, should be made available to assist other state agencies with both transportation and security needs.
So it just seems like, getting back to what Teresa was saying, that we should make.
Well, I don't know if Annie wants to respond to that.
That's where your timesheets would come in.
Agree. And I think that, so let me just clarify. So I think what was occurring was, so Sheriff Marcoux does not have a state paid deputy. So he was using per diems. I think he was using his staff to do the program. And
He didn't say he was doing that. That's what says sheriffs have traditionally, not me. Sheriffs have traditionally utilized state paid deputies for some contracted work as a way to help pay for the cars and equipment.
I think that that's true. We have always told the sheriffs they cannot charge their time, the state paid deputy time, but that if they want to work out an agreement so that they are able to cover the cost of their vehicle with whatever they're doing, that's okay with us, but they cannot be charging the time. They own the vehicle, so how they pay for that is really not, we don't oversee that. We pay mileage if they're doing a court transport or a transport that's authorized under the statute. So, but we tell them they cannot charge time, that employee's time twice.
So another extension of that, Senator, is that I do use, I have 2 state paid deputies. They work 80, Annie, correct me on the number, I think it's 80 or 86 hours per pay period as their standard schedule. In addition to that, I employ them part-time through my department. And while I'm not technically obligated by federal law to pay them overtime, I would pay them overtime to do contractual work. So when they go above the state's allotted time for them, that is when we would then go into contract time. So there are times I do use them for contract work, but that is how they earn overtime. That is how they, it's as close to an equivocation as a corrections officer working an additional shift or a trooper working a DUI patrol, things of which they are also able to do. So those are things that we do to try and offset the cost of their vehicles. The mileage rate is generally, for lack of better words, I'll say that's so I can pay for the cost and the replacement of the Honda Civic. Our vehicles have numerous enhancements to them that are above and beyond the federal reimbursement rate, such as partitions for prisoners in the vehicle, lights, radios, and it seems that that technology is advancing quicker than we can even keep up. So there is an acknowledgement that when I drive, one of my deputies drives that car from the courthouse to the jail or vice versa, and then it sits idle for 8 hours, it earns no money. It still costs the same amount of money, but it earns none. And so as we look at our private contracts, which is separate from the state deputies, but we look at those, we do build the cost of the cruiser into it in addition to a mileage rate. So I don't think that this is to say that the way the system has always run is the most efficient or effective. And part of this committee's discussion has been bringing things into in the future into a better working system. And I think we support that. And the sheriffs look to be a willing partner to say, how do we work this out so it works for everyone?
I have a question.
Madam Chair.
Has this system of accounting been audited in any way, either by obviously the state auditor has looked at it. We're not going to solve this today. That's all I'm thinking. This is
No, we're only making recommendations to the
Yeah.
standing committee. These are some of the broad items to look
Right.
at, but to get into the nuance of it is really beyond our
yeah.
ability.
Do it.
So,
I think Annie is muted.
is Ann muted?
Thank you. Yes, Senator Lyons, the sheriffs are audited. I think they're audited. Seven offices are audited 1 year, and then the next 7 are audited
Right.
the second year. And then the state auditor randomly pulls information and does sort of sporadic checks on questions and or if directed by the legislature. Those every other year audits are performed by McSorley, who Doug Hoffer contracts for them to do that. It really, I don't think that they get into a lot of review of timesheets per se. So that was one of the reasons I think that was one of the big takeaways from Auditor Hoffer's recommendation was that needs to be done more consistently and more thoroughly.
Thank you.
Butch?
Thanks. So I'm going to go out on a limb, which I want to do once in a while. I think I heard that there's an issue with getting paid for deputy transport vehicles when they're not moving, when they're not mileage, while they're sitting waiting for whatever procedures was happening to the person that they're transporting. Did I also hear that as a way to get reimbursement for that, we are allowing additional hours to be charged for sheriff's deputies? Did I hear that, or did I hear it incorrectly?
Representative Shaw, no, the deputies do the state timesheets and they have to record their time exactly as it's worked. So no, they can't, for example, put in an extra 2 hours on the timesheet that they didn't work. I mean, the timesheets are specific to how many hours you worked each day. I think that perhaps what we've heard is that the sheriffs will sometimes use their services on another contract if they're not transporting, and that helps to alleviate the pressures on the mileage. And I guess I'd refer to Sheriff Anderson to say, did I capture that correctly, Mark?
Mostly, yes. So the piece I'll add is this would be above and beyond the work they do for the state. So one of my deputies transports 80 hours every 2 weeks, and then or provides whatever services as required. And after that period, he can also work overtime. So if he had an 8-hour schedule today, he could work 10 hours today, 8 of which are billed to the state as part of his duties to the state. And then 2 of those hours would be billed to, say, a grant, such as the Governor's Highway Program, which is separately funded and awarded to my department.
And that may be where they get paid time and a half.
Correct.
Sure to be an interesting conversation, the one that the committee's of jurisdiction.
Right. So our role is to make a recommendation for legislative action. And we have a memo before us here that I would like to really focus in on so we can finish our work. So it was recommended that 1 and 2 be reversed, and that the title of 2 get reworded a little bit to indicate that the current structure is outdated, and considering a change in the organizational structure of transport deputies to be more reflective of how they're actually used or what their purpose is. So Ameren is good at putting language together to capture that. The other part that was brought up was we need a recommendation that there'd be more consistency in the timesheet reporting. And then Sheriff Anderson mentioned about some reference should be done somewhere in the report to the 2018 transport study that talked about costs. And also some language incorporating how the impact of electronic arraignments, what they have had. I don't know if that'd be a recommendation or more backup information. So that's what I've captured. I don't know if I've captured everything.
I think that was all of it. I would just say, rather than framing it as more consistency, if we talked about uniformity in timesheets, because more consistency sounds like we would still tolerate 14 different versions, just that they might be a little closer, but uniformity is.
It's more what we're saying.
Yeah.
That's good.
Ameren, did you follow all that and capture that?
I did. I had the same number of suggested edits as you. Swap 1 and 2 for the new number 1 to change the first sentence so that it would read something more along the lines of the current organizational structure of transport deputies may be outdated for the state's needs. The committee recommends the organizational structure be reevaluated to determine the best structure to meet the state's needs and to benefit those individuals transported by transport deputies.
While you're on that point, I mean, I think we really have been talking about, I know the statute says that their primary duties are transporting people, but we've also been talking about things like
other
Senator Sears was talking about other duties that the state may need. So I think that we need to take that into consideration when we're talking about that. That's what I'm meaning by might be outdated. Our needs as a state have diversified, and our definition of what state transport deputies do has not diversified.
So that would be more in the explanation, I think. Wouldn't it? I mean, I don't think you can capture all that in the title.
It's a reason to do this.
Right, yeah, I'm just saying that
The need for change is because the duties have changed. I mean,
the needs have diversified and we haven't kept pace with that in terms of.
Increased and diversified.
Mhm.
what do they do when they're only needed 20 hours a week?
Mhm.
What do they do with the other 20 hours? That's as basic as I can make it.
Yeah.
I think that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
That's what's changed.
So that would be looking at it in the recommendations part, correct? Is what you're thinking, and not
No,
the
I
back.
think- I'm
not the-
thinking that those are the
Those are questions.
Those are the
the
questions.
questions really is, I don't want, I think they're down to 20 out of the 25 allocated. And rather than continuing to dwindle the numbers.
I think that just, you have the term organizational structure. I would just add and duties. I mean, because that's what I don't think we need to have a big long explanation, but the previous thing that you were talking about in terms of, that was the feedback that I gave, but I think if you add, it's the structure and duties.
Have changed, and read again what you wrote there, Cameron, for the new one.
The current organizational structure of transport deputies may be outdated for the state's needs. The committee recommends the organizational structure be reevaluated to determine the best structure to meet the state's needs and to benefit those individuals, and I can say served by transport deputies if we're talking about more than just.
So I think it does work, what Teresa was saying, after you mentioned the organizational structure and duties. In both of those situations where it says organizational structure, I think that captures it. Does that make sense to the committee? Okay, and then we'll have another number that talks about more uniformity in the timesheet reporting.
Did you want to tie your recommendation to the recommendation in the audit report?
About the
Specifically
uniformity?
About the timesheets, or a more general recommendation that there be requirement for uniformity in timesheet reporting?
That's the appropriate place to put it. I'm open.
You say consistency.
You said uniformity.
Well,
Yeah, you said,
yeah. I think it's important to be clear about what we're talking about. If you truly want apples to apples, you'll have one timesheet and everybody uses it. And then it can all be, all those numbers can be crunched perfectly, transparently. Whereas, I mean, this is the same problem we've always had with school districts. They were all using their own accounting methods. You could never get proper data, so you could never generate proper public policy out of it. So since there's so few that we're talking about, asking them to use one timesheet seems the least they could do.
So Amron, where were you suggesting putting that?
That would be a new recommendation.
A brand new recommendation, but you would link it with the auditors, state auditors reports. So,
Yes.
okay.
It sounds like he's looking for a uniform timesheet that includes those items recommended by the state auditor.
Okay, good.
So I have written down to look at standardized pay rates. I think Senator Sears brought that up. Did we?
Wouldn't that be in the
I was
purview?
mistaken on that one.
Okay.
Sheriff Anderson explained that they're the lowest paid state employee, a state paid law enforcement officers are not necessarily the lowest paid.
Deputies.
Because I was just wondering about standardized pay.
I was confused that,
State.
I thought they were the lowest paid deputies, but they're not necessarily
The lowest paid law enforcement officer,
paid by the state.
paid by the
It's
state.
called the state deputy, yes, I
Right.
guess.
Do we need to make reference to that? Do we need to include that? That would be in the backup language that was laid out at the beginning of the memo.
I agree, and I think it's also covered in the, at least two of the recommendations that looks at
The per diems.
the rec per diems and the cost of transport.
So do you think we need to state that? The state paid deputy sheriffs are the lowest paid law enforcement officers that are paid by the state? Do we need to state that or not?
No.
No? No, okay, I'm fine with that. And then there was also a recommendation that we look at the 2018 transport study. So that would be a new recommendation.
A new recommend, I had that under the third recommendation.
And then under the third one, okay, that's fine. Because I would just like to get at least the motion on the table and a vote on this. I know that Cameron needs to do another draft, but I'm having faith, because we're not having another meeting, that these are incorporated in the new memo that would be submitted. People comfortable with that?
Yeah, if you're looking for a motion, I'd be happy to make a motion that we approve the draft dated November 15th as amended. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? It's the draft as amended. We just talked about, and what I would recommend is Ameren can incorporate that and send this out to us by email. Either way, today, tomorrow, whatever, tomorrow, Saturday, Monday, whatever works for you.
Okay.
Monday, Tuesday, Monday's fine, Tuesday's fine.
It's due on Monday, I believe.
Okay.
The 15th, it's the 15th Monday.
Yes.
15.
And moved and seconded. Any other discussion?
I know I can't vote being remote, but I support it.
Thank you, Corey. I forgot about you. I've got to keep remembering, we're hybrid here. Okay, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Unanimous, all those opposed? It is unanimous. There is what? 9 of us?
901.
8, 9-0. 901. Thank you. Thank you, Ameren.
You're welcome.
And we'll help this committee, so they'll be working on it. January, good luck, Dick.
No, I don't know. Senator White has a way of taking,
All week.
Well, that
Somebody's glad
concludes,
to have her.
some of them I'm glad to have. her
Yeah.
take. This one I wanted to make sure. Should be part of the appropriations.
it will be in the end. So this wraps up our work for today, and it wraps up our work for our summer and fall. I think we did some good recommendations that are being submitted in a variety of areas. And we did have a heavy workload, and I want to thank all of you for participating. I know it was a trial in terms of having a hybrid venue, and I think it's good that we had our summer study committees being able to make both physically as well as working in a hybrid manner and allowing our members and folks who couldn't make it in to testify to access us through electronic. So I want to thank you all for the work that we've done. And thank you all for making an effort to come here today. And I know, Corey, you would be here today too if you could, but you had other circumstances that popped up. Out. Popped up.
I want to thank you for guiding us through this mess.
Yeah, but you're the one that put all the language in for us. to
No, I
do.
wasn't. It was people who didn't want to make decisions said,
Yeah.
oh, let the.
I didn't
The
also
Oversight
want to
Committee.
thank Julie for subbing for us for the last two meetings. She's come in and managed to get, us organized and on air and everything. So thank you, Julie.
So I'm going to keep my eyes open for all the good work that you're going to do as a result of the memo.
Yeah, right. We hope. So with that, I think we'll sign off being on air. And everyone can start